Survival Guide for New Parents. Good morning, happy holidays, and welcome to the program.
Happy holidays to you too.
First of all, I would like to hold this up every Tuesday morning in the, there it is, in the Journal Sentinel Q section, back page. You may recognize him because he does a column for parents. Many, many topics he has tackled, and he's going to keep doing it, so that's good for all of us who are parents out there. But there it is. I'm sure you've seen it. So he is a familiar face. I'm so happy to have you on the program. First off, why pediatrics?
I've asked myself that question many times. The reason mostly was when I was a medical student and rotating through the different specialty services, internal medicine, surgery, and primary care services too, of course. I liked the people who were in pediatrics. They seemed to be mellow, kind of type B personalities, kind of laid back, and that seemed to be more my style. I find out that pediatrics really isn't that way. It's actually fairly fast-paced and quite busy, but it seems that the people that are in it are a little bit more of a relaxed nature, and I guess it's because you have to be that way with kids. You have to be a little bit more patient and laid back and not just enter a room and kind of jump in on them.
Right. You develop the rapport with the patient as well as the family.
Sure. In fact, I remember many years back walking into a room and greeting the patient, saying hello to the child, and the mother said to me, "How come you never say hello to me when you come into the room?" And as a matter of fact, I think that as I've gone on, I start relating to children younger and younger, and I think that's good because it encourages them to kind of interact in the whole process too.
And it helps that you're a parent yourself. Do you take any of your advice to heart? Or were your kids the testers? Were they the laboratory mice, so to speak?
I think what they've given me is a little bit more credibility, and I think people are often more comfortable with their own insecurities and their own difficulties raising their kids when they hear that I have the same kind of situations and the same kind of successes and the same kind of lack of successes and disappointments and wonderful things that happen just like they do too. So I think it gives me credibility more than anything else.
All right, let's talk a little bit about new parents. First, talk about the parents themselves, and then let's go into the steps of childhood.
Well, it's you know, a trite thing, but it's true that of all the things that we do in our life, parenting is probably the thing we come into least prepared, and yet it's one of the most important things that many people will do in their life is raise their children. And so parents come into the experience of having a baby, having focused for a long time on labor and delivery, and maybe reading something about babies and children, but really not having that baby or child in front of them to be able to focus on. And it's not as meaningful to read and learn and hear about babies until you actually have the baby. So preparation is helpful and useful, but it doesn't really sink in until the baby is actually born. And to a large extent, I think new parents don't know what to expect. And for that reason, almost anything that comes up, because there isn't always a lot of sense of security from previous experience or previous information, they get concerned about things that are not necessarily abnormal, but different or new, and they don't know if they're abnormal or not. So it can be a source of a lot of anxiety for new parents. And
then you have the parents who, you know, how can they, there's the baby in front of them and all of a sudden it's like, and everything they may have read just is, whoa, it's out the window. Yeah. It's out the window with that first, you know, that first look, and it's like, whoa, this is mine, I can't give it back.
Yeah, it's often helpful, I think, for parents if they have some sort of backup system, if their own parents are around to give them some support. So if a parent may even be uncomfortable holding a baby, that somebody can just kind of take the baby and kind of show them and show how when they're relaxed with the baby tends to relax. So it's helpful to have that sort of person around. With many discharges now from the hospitals occurring at 24 hours or even a little sooner, parents after the exhausting experience of labor and delivery and a very brief recovery really don't have a lot of time to become comfortable with the baby, just in terms of simple things like holding and feeding and changing clothing and bathing. So they really need somebody to kind of help with that. And although as a physician in our offices we can give support to those questions that people may have, and to a large extent that's why I wrote a book, is to help support new parents. We can't be there every minute, and so that makes it difficult and a little frustrating, sometimes scary for new parents.
What about those well-meaning friends and relatives? Granted, pediatrics has changed from 30 years ago. You know, the babies were always put down on their stomach, bottle milk, breast milk, all those different controversies. What about the people who are saying, well, you know, I didn't do that when you were that age, or when I had you, or well, my baby was never like that. I mean, sometimes you're just bombarded with that and you want to pull your hair out.
And sometimes it can be very helpful, and sometimes you need that sort of input from people, because you just kind of can't make a decision and somebody tells you something and it sounds good and you do it. But sometimes you get conflicting input from people that isn't necessarily even solicited and is different than what the last person told you. It can be very confusing, and often it's based on one parent's experience with one child, and of course children are all different. So sometimes that's a source of anxiety for parents, that they've been told this by one person, that by another person. And many times they even have their own ideas of what it is they want to do, but because other people are telling them these things, it really puts them into some conflict. But you know, like I say, sometimes the advice can be very welcome too, if it comes from an experienced, calm person who's not just trying to impose their will or their view on somebody else.
Or the non-parent who comes along, a well-meaning friend who doesn't have any children, says, but I read,
or I had a friend with.
I had a friend with, that's right, that's right.
And I don't want to completely negate those kinds of inputs, because it's occasionally happened where somebody clued a parent onto something significant that we wanted to know about. But most often it can confuse a new parent, and of course they're open to all sorts of suggestions and information, but it really, again, that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because one of the things I address in the book is all those different sources of information you hear, and it's not just from friends or family or relatives, but even sometimes from physicians and healthcare personnel will say things that I don't necessarily agree with.
Is it wise for parents, before they become parents to sit down and talk to a pediatrician? I mean, can they go around and interview? What's the thing to do in the 90s these days?
Well, the thing to do is a prenatal, whether you call it an interview or a meeting, or we call it a get-to-know-you visit at our office. And I don't think it's essential to do. I think if a parent is comfortable with the recommendation of their friends or an obstetrician or family member who's seen a physician, and they can glean enough from hearing about that physician that they feel they would be comfortable too, I don't think it's essential. I think for parents who aren't sure if they're going to have good rapport with somebody, it's nice to sit down and just kind of see what that person likes, see how they interact with you. Are they speaking in a friendly manner, or do they seem cold and detached? And that sometimes can be helpful for new parents who are kind of having trouble making a selection. It doesn't have to be a long visit. I think 5 to 10 minutes is enough, because you don't want to be asking specific medical questions. That's really not fair to do when the physician is not your physician. But just some things about philosophy, some things about the office, I think, can give people a good enough idea if this is somebody that they want to bring their kid to, as somebody who they feel they can have a working relationship with.
One of the common complaints that I've heard from friends is that well, you have this appointment at 10 o'clock to see the pediatrician, and I don't get in there till 5 to 11. But, you know, there really is no way to avoid that. I mean, that's the nature of your practice.
Yeah, it is. I fortunately don't think we run that far behind most of the time, but there are a lot of things that cause physicians to run late, and that is you can't, although you try to schedule, we really try very hard not to overbook, and we try to anticipate things that may take longer, but you can't always. No. There are people that need to come in on an emergency basis, and we try to anticipate by leaving enough slot for those, but you can't always guess. There may be somebody who came in with a problem that's more complicated or has more questions than was anticipated, and so you do start running behind for that reason. Sometimes people will bring in a second or third child, or have questions about a second or third child, and you know, you feel that as long as they're there, maybe they could kind of have that child checked or ask some questions about that too. And I think they don't realize that is not something we were able to anticipate. So we always like to encourage our patients that at least let us know so we can anticipate and try to accommodate that as best as we can.
What kind of philosophy do you have? What is your philosophy as a pediatrician?
I guess my bottom line is, as a parent, I like to see parents parenting from a position of flexibility. In other words, not to expect everything to be this way, that way, the other way with a child, but to realize that there's a broad variation of how children are, how they behave, and that having rigid expectations can be very frustrating if you're a parent, and tends to cause sort of a low-grade state of anxiety because the children are very often not going to behave according to your expectations. So to be flexible and to realize that there's a lot of variability, and most things that you see that you didn't know a baby did are normal, and not that they're abnormal, I think allows a parent to relax and really enjoy the parenting experience much more. So I guess my basic philosophy is to be flexible and appreciate normal variability of children.
And to it, I think what you said, the word enjoy, you know, enjoy being a parent, enjoy having that child or those children around.
Well, that's really, I mean, I don't know what else it's about. I mean, it's not a well-paid job, that's for sure, so you might as well enjoy it.
That's right. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we will continue our conversation with pediatrician Dr. Howard Gollup, so please don't go away.
NFL Hall of Fame member Bart Starr talks about the advantages of donating your used vehicle to the Rawhide Boys Ranch.
I think it's the finest facility of its type in the country. We take those cars and the dealers purchase these automobiles. This provides us with a very important income. We could not sustain this facility here without that.
To find out more about a tax-deductible vehicle donation to the Rawhide Boys Ranch, call 1-800-RAWHIDE.
Please contribute those automobiles to us. They're put to great use.
Super 18 Bank One and the Volunteer Center ask you to lend a helping hand this holiday season and become a Bank One volunteer.
We try and satisfy a lot of people by giving them bags of food and so forth.
There are hundreds of different volunteering opportunities throughout the state, so take the time.
I believe everybody, especially retired people, have time to volunteer, to really put their mind to it.
Call the Volunteer Center at 273-HELP or stop by any Bank One location to get your free brochure listing hundreds of volunteering opportunities.
I'm Carney Wilson. I'm coming out with a new talk show this fall, and we're telling everybody in America about it. One-on-one, and you're number 13. Yes!
Carney Wilson. She's the fun one.
Do you speak English?
And she's coming this fall.
Yes, we're going to talk about relationships, love.
What about them sex things, though? You going to get to that?
Well, we'll take it easy, but we'll have a little.
Carney, the word's getting around.
Hello! I'm Carney Wilson.
Weekdays at 4 on Super 18.
My new talk show is premiering.
Welcome back to Milwaukee Observer. We're having a wonderful conversation with Dr. Howard Gollup. He is a southeastern Wisconsin area pediatrician, and he's also the author of this book called Dr. Gollup's Survival Guide for New Parents. This book is, and I'm not in the habit of promoting anything, but this book is better than Dr. Spock. And I really think if you are expecting, if you're a new parent, even I'm kind of like an old-time parent, but it's a great book. And if you need information on how to get this book, how to order it, and it's reasonably priced. It's $297-9294. This is a book that I think is a must-have for any parent out there. It's just got tremendous information, tips. It's very concise. It's in bigger print, so those of us who are older parents can read it without having to put on those reading glasses. But it is a marvelous book. What inspired you to write the book, Dr. Gollup?
Well, actually, I'd say my patients did. I started writing patient information material, actually...
Little handouts?
Little handouts, little individual sheets, and giving them at the appropriate time to parents. And they were very popular, but then sometimes a parent would lose one or would not have one that for a situation that hadn't come up yet. Mm-hmm. And so we decided, well, maybe it'll be good to kind of bind them all together. So we did, and then people kept saying, you should write a book. And so we did, and just used it within the practice. And then people started saying, well, you should publish this. So that's what I did.
So it's out there now, and it is, again, this is a terrific book, and it's, and I'm not in the habit of specifically promoting certain items or individuals or causes or whatever on the show, but this book, you know, for parents, this is a great book for parents, and it's you know, it's easy to read. There's charts and things in there, but you cover everything, and you really get into some of the medical lingo with the antibiotics. Mm-hmm. You know, well, what is the difference between amoxicillin, erythromycin, the penicillin, you know, all that stuff that is, parents hear it or they see it on a prescription and they're not really clear about what duties it should do.
Well, I think one of the things that I also found is that I am somebody who, when I prescribe something or when I am discussing a particular diagnosis or talking about a particular even wellness issue, mm-hmm. that I like to go into some detail and explain some of the background behind a recommendation. I think people then they understand that what you're saying isn't necessarily arbitrary or just comes out of the air, but there's some basis in what you're saying. And sometimes in the course of an office visit, there just isn't enough time, or the baby's crying, or there's a sibling that's interrupting, or you sometimes just don't have enough time, mm-hmm. And parents can't always remember everything you said. So I always felt, you know, write it all down, and then a parent has something to refer to. And for any particular recommendation, there's a paragraph that describes why that recommendation exists, and I think that it makes people more comfortable. They're more likely to, I think, make better decisions about what it is they're going to do with their child if they understand that there is a basis for it and what that basis is.
You also you give both sides of the story. For instance, circumcision, not circumcision, bottle feeding, breastfeeding, you know, different things. So parents can read this and then make their own choices.
Right. I don't want to raise anybody else's child. I think raising my own children is...
And you don't have enough insurance to do that either.
I feel like, I mean, there obviously are certain situations where a physician has to make a strong recommendation to a parent, but for a lot of things, I think it's a matter of kind of drawing both sides and maybe making a little bit of a gentle push towards one side, but really giving the pros and cons of a lot of these wellness and child raising issues, and let people decide what it is they want to do, knowing why and why they're not doing certain things.
There may be some people out there who would be critical of the fact that, well, you know, this is another book, and some guy's out there publishing a book about parenthood. We're bombarded with I mean, you go in any bookstore and there's just shelves of parenting, children's issues, everything. We didn't have that, or our parents didn't have that 40 years ago, mm-hmm. did they? I mean, it's kind of like, well, there was one book and that was it, and you did it this way, and sort of...
Yeah. What Spock did was very clever, and he came into an environment that there was no competition for. Mm-hmm. And now there are, like you say, dozens and dozens of parenting books. And I think there's maybe some reasons for that. The extended family doesn't always live in the same environment anymore, and whereas in the days 30, 40 years ago, I grew up in a duplex and my grandparents lived downstairs. That doesn't happen much anymore. No. And the grandparents who were a major support historically might be hundreds of miles away because we're so mobile. So I think people turn to other sources for support.
And what about the people that say, we grew up just fine, or my mom used to do this, or they did this for us? Phooey with the books. What's your reaction to that? If it works?
If it works, I mean, I think if people are able to use common sense and have good judgment, that's fine. I think sometimes we need to get back to using more common sense in parenting and other matters too. But if somebody parents just by reacting to situations and never really comes to grip with having an overall philosophy or an overall approach to parenting, it may not be very effective. I think that sometimes we do try to overanalyze all situations, and I think that our society in general is sort of in that sort of expert mode. If you can't make a decision, consult an expert. Sometimes they're afraid to use their own resources and exercise some common sense. They're kind of afraid of making the wrong decision. And I think people should feel free to be able to do that, to be able to come to some decision on their own if they're comfortable with that, and feel free to do that sort of thing. And if they find using a book as a resource helpful, or the well-meaning advice of other people that we talked about before, that's okay too.
We've spent most of the time talking about issues concerning, parenting, doing that job well, the children. What about, is there a downside to what you do? By that I mean, what about the kids? There's so many, many more kids that are abused these days.
Well, we see our share of all sorts of different kinds of problems, and those are always hard situations, and they're always situations that as a physician you spend a lot of time and mental energy and a lot of emotional energy with too. But when you help a situation like that, although something like child abuse is sort of a no-win situation for anybody, there are other situations where you can help families find solutions to the problems, which are very encouraging sorts of situations that show you a lot about sort of the good sides of people too. I think we see a lot more of that.
What do you think pediatric medicine is going to be like, say, 30 years down the road from now?
Well, I probably won't be doing it, but there will be, I think, probably more what they call extended providers, more nurse practitioners and physician's assistants. I hope that there will still be a big impact on preventative health care services. I hope that with cuts in what we're able to afford medically, that we still do some of those things that help keep people healthy, and especially in pediatrics we feel quite strongly about that, because we see ourselves as sort of the quintessential preventative medical people, and have always viewed ourselves as cost effective, because when you're working with kids, before it was necessary or popular to limit tests and limit x-rays, we've always done that just because we didn't want to do unnecessary things to kids. So some of the managed care incentives haven't been that different to us. We've always tried to avoid overdoing things to our patients to the extent that that might be done in some instances. I think more healthcare extenders. I think that's probably going to happen over the next 30 years.
So you really don't think the house calls are ever going to come back, are they?
I've made actually a few in my life, but it's been when it was actually working out better for me. You know, I could see somebody on my way home who called late in the day, or somebody with a potentially contagious illness. I remember years ago making a house call on a child who I thought may have had the mumps, and I went and I saw her at home, and indeed I thought she did. And that night I woke up in the middle of the night and looked at my wife and said, "Have I had the mumps?" I think I was immunized, though.
One of the hazards of the job.
Yeah.
Another thing, the immunizations, certainly more emphasis is being put on having the children immunized at the proper time with the proper immunizations. We've seen in the past year and a half, 2 years, the chickenpox vaccine come out. I mean, my kids went through the chickenpox. I'd have given anything if there'd have been a vaccine to prevent that. It was, you know, one of those cases where they had so many dots on them you could hardly, you know, tell where anything else was. What else do you see us conquering as far as childhood illnesses?
Well, there's a lot of gastrointestinal infections, one in particular called rotavirus, which is the major cause of viral gastroenteritis that we see in winter, and we're hoping that there'll be a vaccine for that coming out maybe in the next decade. That's a major source of illness for kids. I think, to me, that's the most exciting prospect in terms of just frequency of illness. I also am eagerly anticipating the new DPT vaccine. As you probably know, there's been a lot of controversy about pertussis vaccine and whether it can or doesn't cause any neurological trouble for babies. Has never really been settled. And I think I would be very happy if it never gets settled, and it's a moot point because we have a cleaner vaccine and a safer vaccine. And so I'm hoping that in the next few years there's approval for what's called the acellular vaccine to be given to young infants. Right now it's approved for booster doses for 18 months and 5-year-old children, but I'm hoping that there's approval for infants because I think it'll take the fear out of much of that.
You know, and you've got to sign those consent forms too when certain vaccines are given to children, and that's pretty scary for a new parent.
Yeah, it is, because you don't want to take any risks that anything could possibly happen, even if the risks are remote. But you have to put it into perspective of how we live our lives, and there's risks to everything we do, and I think you just have to make the best decision you can, and I believe in most instances that the immunizations, that receiving them represents the best interest. What isn't often said about immunizations is, when we talk about risks and benefits, is we're not weighing just the individual, we're talking about populations. And the reason that we give immunizations is because the benefit is to the population as a whole, and there's a much greater benefit than the rest of the population, but you can never say for any one individual child that they couldn't be the one in whatever it might be, several thousand, several 100,000, that couldn't have an adverse reaction.
We're out of time. I can hardly believe that because it flew by so fast. One last plug for the book. It is Dr. Gollup's Survival Guide for New Parents. It is a must. If you need more information on it, call me here at the station or dial this number, 297-9294. I highly recommend it. It's a must-read for new parents. Keep it on your bookshelf. You go back and refer to it. And I've certainly enjoyed having you on the program, Dr. Gollup. And read his column every Tuesday in the Journal-Sentinel newspaper. Keep writing, and I hope you come back and visit us sometime soon. Thank you very much for joining us, and I'll see you again next week. In the meantime, have a great week.